Okay, class. Okay, so the purpose of this lecture is to discuss one of Alan Moore's other main concepts, and and this again ties in with philosophy, Nietzsche, Hobbes, and all these guys, and that's the idea of anarchy and fascism being the only two types of government that we have. And all governments can be put on a sliding scale that go towards either anarchy or go towards fascism. Now, it's important to understand what anarchy is because it's kind of taken on a strange kind of meaning that's not really anarchy in society. So basically anarchy is not chaos, okay? Anarchy is what happens when governments become too militant, too controlling, too fascist. And what you have is not chaos, but it's essentially a kind of a lack of order that springs from forced order and control. And out of this lack of order or rebellion rises new forms of government. Essentially the way kind of America rose out of the fascism of, England in the early colonial days. Now, on the other end, if you're not familiar with fascism, it might be argued that America has been slipping into fascism more and more, every year. But essentially what fascism is it's the rise of a police state. It is the control of what people say, what people do. It's a lot of laws. I don't know if you guys know, but America has more laws than any other country in the world. Also, more people in jail percentage-wise. It also encapsulates an authoritarian rule. Where governments unfairly wield their power, to deprive people of money and freedoms. And so I guess American democracy on that sliding scale is starting to get more and more and more towards fascism. And so, in V for Vendetta, what you're going to see is Adam Susan, and in the movie it's called Adam Sutler. And by the way, the movie is nothing like the book. So if you're depending on watching the movie to get through this thing, good luck. But Adam Susan is definitely on the end of fascism, and whereas V is over there on the end of the Ubermensch, he's on the end of anarchy. What's going to be needed to create some kind of new ideal government, which is what Eve is going to end up doing. So I'm going to talk about them for a second. If you'll notice, there's all kinds of connections in this book. And anytime that V is talking to Lady Liberty, Lady Justice, and Lady Anarchy, and he's talking about having these affairs with them, and Adam Susan is talking to Fate, and V is talking to Evie. Basically, they're outlining their ideas of what fascism and what anarchy is. Now, we get that through Adam Susan through his discussions with the computer Fate. Now, the computer Fate is funny because Alan Moore, it's funny how science fiction predicts the future. The computer Fate is what Adam Susan is married to. Adam Susan is I guess what you would consider a kind of a Republican conservative, but an English version of that, a very conservative party member. He's a virgin. He is literally married to the computer system Fate, and what it does is it is tied into all the speakers, all the banks, all the computers, everywhere, all the phones, surveillance systems everywhere in England. And it records everything that we see and do, and it predicts how we're going to behave. And this is how Adam Susan is able to rise to power and also able to control the people. Now, our own government has, a system that we use like this. Was supposed to be used to, to counter terrorism, and that was part of what Edward Snowden when he defected from the NSA and went to China and went to Russia, and he released this information to the people. That was one of his main concerns, is that our own American government was going to start using this predictive capability on the people to control us. And so those are interesting documentaries if you feel interested in that. But what happens is Adam Susan is married to that idea. Now you also see something similar with Ozymandias. Adrian Veidt uses the same kind of predictive capability, but his own mind does it. It's more organic. But we'll get to that later. Now, as I said, V and Adam Susan can often be compared. One thing you'll notice about Alan Moore is he might have one panel of one character that ends on one page, and on the next page it's the exact same art with a different character in the same situation. Like when Adam Susan has his hands on the computer Fate, and then V is playing a song, and V for Vendetta, and has his fingers on the keyboards. You'll see that with Eve too. I mean, you have Adam and Evie, Adam and Eve, because Adam Susan creates this new fascist England out of a need to survive, and he tells you in a monologue why he did that. I mean, there's been a world war. Africa no longer exists. It's a burning cinder. There's been starvation everywhere, disease. Most of the world's empires have fallen. America has trying to survive, trying to hang on. They're doing pretty bad. The world has burned. There's been climate change due to this nuclear war, and so basically Adam Susan felt that in order for England to survive, he had to seize control in the way that he did. And his monologue makes you feel sympathy for him because there's so much chaos. He puts order to it, and he uses fascism to do so. There's also a lot of comparisons to Hitler and kind of Nazi-isms because of this Norse fire thing that Adam Susan, this group, is kind of like Nazis do. They round up anybody who's gay, anybody who's a minority, anybody who's not a conservative, and they put them in concentration camps and kill them. So you're going to see a lot of comparisons throughout the comic to Nazi Germany, and that might be a decent research paper. Evie, ends up looking like a Holocaust victim at one point. So you're going to see a lot of that, even right down to the striped pajamas. And V, on the other hand, so even though Adam Susan is really evil, you sympathize with his reasoning, not his actions, but why he wanted to do it. But then once you figure out what he did, you're like, oh, But V is a little bit interesting as well because he's not completely the good guy. It really blurs the lines between, what is a terrorist and what is a freedom fighter. And V refers to himself as a monster. Because, in anarchy and any kind of revolution, monstrous things are done. Like the bloody French Revolution. And so, V even has devil horns several times throughout it. Even though there's a little bit of the absurd in this comic book, this absurd British humor like you would see on Benny Hill. V calls himself a monster, and he does do monstrous things. He does monstrous things to Evie. Unlike the movie, in this comic, his killing of these men causes consequences to women. The widows of the men he killed. Rose ends up becoming a prostitute in order to survive, and she ultimately assassinates Adam Susan and ends up being probably tortured to death in jail. We know she's tortured. We assume she's probably going to die in jail. He takes Evie and he abandons her. Then he puts her through like a fake torture camp type thing. And it's all in order to make her, the kind of the new philosophy or new ideal that's going to, kind of like Eve giving life in the Bible it's going to, she's going to be the one to create this new England, and she takes V's place. Which is why you have that interesting scene at the end when V's dead and she takes off the mask, and it goes through a series of faces you think she's going to see, and then it ends up being her own. Anyway, so, V is, pretty much a monster. Now, I do want to mention, you might want to look into Guy Fawkes and the Fawkes mask on this. It's on the cover. Basically, Guy Fawkes tried to blow up Parliament. I think it was 1583. I can't remember the exact date, but it's November 5th. And that's what this character is based on, kind of like the hackers, is anonymous. But you might want to look into Guy Fawkes for that. Thank you.